here live at 6:54, a little bit early even, and tonight we're going to be talking about the test that I put up, the video that I put up today on LS1, the OG 5.7 liter all aluminum LS1 mods. So we did a lot of cool testing, and we talked a little bit about this last night. We talked about the different camshafts, and I thought maybe I made a mistake on one of the cam tests. It kind of looks like I did. Either that was not the right camshaft that was in that box, or something else happened. It was put in a tooth off, or I don't know, something weird. So we'll have to figure that out. But in addition to that, as you saw from the video, I did a lot of other testing with that. So we ran, as a matter of fact, I didn't even include all of the stuff that we tested. I included some of it. So we ran a throttle body test, the stock throttle body versus an AccuFab. And as we saw at the power level that we were at, the AccuFab throttle body didn't gain a ton of power. You know, it was about 6 at the top. But that's not because that throttle body won't support more power. It certainly will. It's just that the motor's not making enough power to really tax the throttle body. So that's the throttle body situation. But the interesting thing is, and the thing that probably most people are going to want to talk about, and hopefully you guys are going to want to talk about that tonight. I'm going to go ahead and pop up my chat here. What's up, Uncle Squirrels? Oh, I got a bunch of guys in the house. So what we're going to want to talk about tonight, basically, I think more than anything, is the intake manifold testing that I did. Because what I did was run a lot of cool stuff. And we ran the single plane versus a dual plane, which is the typical kind of carbureted deal. We also ran the EFI intake manifold. In this case, was an LS6 manifold versus the dual plane. I also ran it against the single plane because we have runs with each one. But then the other cool thing is, while we're doing there, we're mixing, matching things with the single plane. Because it was a GM Performance single plane, I was also able to run it, and it came basically set up with injector ports in it. So we had to fill the injector ports with injectors, put rails in it. I mean, we're already halfway there. We might as well just put an elbow on there and a throttle body so that we can run that same intake manifold fuel injected. That's always one of the problems when people run comparisons of carburation versus fuel injection. They think that it's a universal thing. Oh, you just run a carburetor and it's better than fuel injection, or you just run fuel injection and it's better than carburation. And more often than not, the big change is not the fuel delivery mechanism, whether it's electronic port injection or whatever, or whether it's a carburetor. The big change normally when guys do this is the intake manifold itself. Like if we compare a LS6 intake manifold to a dual plane manifold, we're not comparing carburation versus fuel injection as a universal thing. We're comparing that carbureted intake manifold versus that fuel injected manifold. And really, that's more of a test of the manifold design than it is of how we're delivering the fuel. If you want to just show, hey, what happens when we deliver fuel with a carburetor versus what happens when we deliver fuel with fuel injection, there are really two ways to do that. One is the way that we showed here, and you guys can take a look at this graph here, and you can see that the red is the fuel injection, the blue is carburation, and in this case, what we did was run them both on the exact same intake manifold. Our GM Performance Parts dual single plane intake manifold was set up with fuel injectors with port injection down near the cylinder head where they usually are, and we ran it with an elbow and a big 105 millimeter throttle body, so airflow was not an issue. We ran that same manifold also with a carburetor with an 850, and at this 450 horsepower level, the carburetor was oversized basically, if anything, for what we were trying to do. So there's no airflow concern here. The difference here in power, and we tried to optimize most of the tunes as best we can. You can't always do that with a carburetor like you can with fuel injection. That's one of the benefits of fuel injection, is we can go in and make the air fuel whatever we want at whatever RPM range we want. You can't always do that with a carburetor. We can change the jets, but changing the jets makes a universal change. Same thing with air bleeds, and I know guys say, oh, you just do high-speed air blades, and it just changes the high speed. No, it doesn't do that. It changes it everywhere, regardless of that. So we can't go in and change at individual RPMs if we want to adjust the air fuel or whatever with a carburetor, and you can with fuel injection. But even with that, the carburetor on this measured on the same intake manifold, and this is what usually happens, because I've done this test like 20 times. So when you run it on the same intake manifold, usually the carburetor, compared to port injection, makes more power. The carburetor makes more power because it has charge cooling. You're atomizing the fuel through the carburetor. You're cooling the air going into the common plenum. It has more time for the air to change temperature because you're doing it right at the top of the manifold and not at the bottom like the port injection is. So there's less time for charge cooling. So ultimately, this is what usually happens is with a carburetor, we oftentimes get more power than port fuel injection. But again, that's not going to make a guy choose a carburetor over fuel injection, because the fuel injection is a lot easier to tune. We don't have to go in and take the carburetor apart to tune fuel injection. We just go like this and we can tune it. And it works much better that way. It's easier to tune. It's much quicker than changing jets and stuff. And a guy that's an EFI guy is probably not a carbureted guy. You know, you get and I guess you could break that down into age maybe, although I don't really see that. But you get guys that are, oh, I'm only an EFI guy, and carburetors are dumb, mostly because they don't understand them. And the opposite is true of that too. Oh, I'm a carburetor guy, fuel injection is dumb, mostly because I don't understand it. When you understand both of them, that's why I do these kinds of tests. We see a direct back-to-back test. The carburetor, because of atomization going through the carburetor, you get charge cooling and you make more power. So if you want to argue about power, you know, it's hard for the fuel-injected guys to actually make more power than a carburetor, especially port-injected guys. Now, the one test I didn't do here, which you could do, is you could do a throttle body injection, which I'm not a huge fan of. But if you did throttle body injection, and you can control, you have more control over the air fuel that way that you don't have with a carburetor. If the throttle body injection is cooperating and it does the same thing every time, and it is able to tune, and you are able to make adjustments, and it does what it's supposed to do, it works very well. I haven't always seen that to be the case. But if you can do that, you can tune it in a way that you can't do with a carburetor. It's providing fuel at the top of the port, so we should have at least comparable power to the carburetor. And I think what the Engine Masters guys did, they maybe even made a little bit more. What you can't do with a throttle body injection, even though you can adjust the fuel, you can't adjust it individually in each cylinder the way that you can with port injection. So it's actually a step down in fuel distribution, just like a carburetor would be, compared to port injection. Port injection is nice, especially if you're running sequential. I can go in and tune individual cylinders if you have some that are rich and some that are lean, and you are always going to have that. And it almost has nothing to do with whether you have a carburetor on there or a throttle body on there or even port injection on there, because if you look at and in this case we ran a single plane intake manifold, when you run a single plane intake manifold, the intake manifold, the design of the manifold itself is going to dictate that the air fuel in each of the individual cylinders is going to be different. And it's going to be different at different engine speeds, because normally you have two short runners in the center, two long ones on the outside. So if you assume that everything else is equal in the way that the air enters them, and that the lengths are exactly even on the 4 and the 4, which they're not, if all of that was true, which it's not, you would still, because of the different runner length, they would be tuned to be effective at different engine speeds. So if you gave them the same amount of fuel, which doesn't happen, it does more so in port injection. If you gave them the same amount of fuel, the 2 or the 4 inner runners would have a different air fuel curve than the 4 outer ones, and then that would actually change as we go up in RPM. As the short runners come into their own where they're starting to be effective, you start having a better signal, they start using more fuel, and then as the long ones become less effective, the air fuel is going to change in the long ones and the short ones. So this happens, it changes during the RPM range. So to be able to go in and do that, and that negates any possibility, and that's just a general statement, that individually the cylinders are not different too, because this assumes that in this discussion, it assumes that the 4 inners are all the same, which they're not, and the 4 outers are all the same, which they're not. So you get a big distribution problem in the intake manifold itself. So going in and being able to tune them individually can be a benefit, not so much for power, as I showed in another video that I have up on distribution of a single plane intake manifold. So if you haven't checked that out, make sure that you go check it out. But it does help with engine longevity. So if you have one cylinder that's running 14 to 1, it may take that even repeatedly for short bursts. But if you tried to run that for a long period of time, you would blow the motor up. And so if you don't tune the fuel in that individual cylinder and you run it for too long, too lean, too long, too bad, I mean, it ends up blowing up. And so that's very important. And that's why when we run a carburetor or we run a throttle body injection, if you ever ran a motor with 802 sensors, you could see all of that happening. And quite frankly, it would probably scare you. Because with these kinds of manifolds, you may see a disparity of, I don't know, 1.5 air fuel. So that means if one is 13-to-1, the other one's 14.5, or it's down at 11.5. We usually tune for everything to be rich and safe, and not for one of them to be at 14.5 at wide open throttle, because obviously that can cause problems. But it is it is a little concerning when you run 802 sensors on these things, and that's why being able to go in and tune it individually, that's why the port injection, if guys are doing that, definitely has an advantage over either a carburetor or even throttle body injection. But we got some other cool stuff here. We also showed, and I'll go ahead and see if I can bring this up. So we'll take a look at the So now I brought up the red line is actually the LS6 intake manifold. So now you can see that the LS6 intake manifold in comparison to the single plane with a carburetor and then the single plane with EFI, the LS6 manifold is quite a bit better than both of those. With the carburetor, the single plane manifold actually makes a little bit more power out here at the very end, like starting at about 5,900, but certainly above 6,000 RPM. The single plane manifold is making more power, as you would kind of expect. The single plane manifold is designed for high RPM power, and that's where they excel. And if I did one more thing and we brought up the dual plane, the interesting thing, I think even more so than this, is that when we bring the dual plane here into the mix here, so now the red here is our dual plane. And the interesting thing, I've always been amazed by this, is that our long runner LS6, composite factory style intake manifold, and the truck might be a little bit better than the LS6, but not a lot, not enough to overcome this. And I saw this when I did the 6-liter LS intake manifold test as well. If you take a look at the dual plane, this is a Performer RPM from Edelbrock with a carburetor on it. And actually the carburetor is probably a little oversized for this. It's an 850, but a wide open throttle, it doesn't seem to be too bad. It'd be more of a problem driving around, I think, than anything. But if you look at the dual plane, it makes more power even than the long runner factory style intake manifold. From about 4,400 on down, the dual plane makes more torque. So I guess the key is, if you want a lot of torque from your LS combination, a long runner EFI intake manifold really isn't the way to go. You need to put a dual plane carbureted manifold on there and make lots of torque. Although, as you can see, it did fall down in power compared to all the manifolds. It's down on power. The crossover for the dual plane and the LS6 manifold is about 4,500 RPM. Then the LS6 is making more power, and it's pretty consistently better than the dual plane all the way out. And obviously the single plane makes the most kind of peak power, but not by a lot. That's a little bit of a blip there at the end. But still, it's good stuff. And we ran the big 90-degree elbow on there with the big open throttle body. So there was never any concern about throttle body size or airflow, because a lot of guys get wrapped up in that. I'm going to go ahead and bring my chat up here. A lot of guys get wrapped up in that. They think that intake manifolding is all about flow. It's actually not. Like, very little of this has anything to do with airflow. Obviously, all of these manifolds flow, but this is all intake design. All of these manifolds flow enough to support this kind of power. All of the ports, if you airflow tested them, if that was your thing, you might see that, for instance, that the single plane flows more than the dual plane does. And yet, the dual plane makes more than the single plane through a lot of the curve. And again, that has nothing to do with it. It doesn't do that because it flows better. It does that because of the intake manifold design. The same thing with the LS6. We've gone over runner length a lot, and I'm going to be doing a video on the one that I'm working on now is actually on a B16 Honda, where we compare short runner and long runner on a turbo application, and you'll see the same kind of thing, that runner length plays a big effect on what the power production is. And then on a turbo application, on this little Honda especially, because it's a fairly small motor, when we lose low speed torque, which we do with a bigger, effectively a single plane short runner EFI manifold on the Honda, we also lose a lot of torque. So it kind of multiplies that loss, which obviously is not what we're looking for. But it shows that picking the right intake manifold, just like on here, you want to pick it for the RPM range that you want to run the motor in, not for flow and that kind of thing. So we'll get to some questions here and see what you guys are doing. GMC Sierra, how bad of a boost beating can a stock bottom on LM7 take? We'll take a look at the big bang stuff. We made 1300 with a stock bottom end, and I don't think we were at the limit of what that thing would take either. I think it would take more than that. I mean, we made 1500 with a 6-liter. I think a 5.3 would take that also, and I think the guys that are out racing stock bottom end stuff, they're really doing it for. I don't think it'll take that for a lot of runs, but you can make a lot of power with them. Yeah, on the LM7, even on the Gen 3 stuff, we made 70 pulls that were at 1,000 horsepower. So we'll do it for a long period of time. It's not going to do 1,500 for a long period of time. Admiral's here. Fish on. It's so funny that all the fishermen yell that. That's the first thing that my father-in-law taught my sons when they were out fishing. You got to yell fish on, man. Myself, I have a Ron Popeil pocket fisherman. Landed lots of fish with that. Have you tested one of those enclosed EFI systems like a Phytech on a dual plane? Yes, we've run the throttle body injections on those, and those all do similar things. A little shot of nitrous will help that pesky drop in low on torque. It's always beneficial. Nitrous is very good for those low torque positions. Hunter, would a 6-liter LQ9 be the best for an all-motor block from the junkyard, or am I missing something else? No, that one works good. I don't find a lot of LQ9s in the junkyard. An LQ4 is the same block, so it would work as well. Unless the LQ9 is might be a Gen 4 versus a Gen 3. Frank, those rules about runner length and RPM apply to all engines, 4-cylinders and V8s and 6s and rotaries and everything. Every internal combustion engine. It basically it's organ pipe theory, so it doesn't even have to be an internal combustion engine. Even if you're playing a musical instrument, the same thing applies. Richard, you watch Street Racing Channel? I don't know is that a channel on YouTube? I don't watch a lot of racing. I used to watch Street Outlaws, but I haven't followed that very much anymore. DFA, this is a good question. Let's say you don't have 8 channels for O2s. Would 8 EGT probes give you similar information on air fuel? No, they won't, because you have other things that affect EGT that's irrespective of air fuel ratio. You can change the timing and dramatically change the EGT, and then that will have no effect on O2. When using a carburetor with an O2 for every cylinder and one or more are lean, should one jet down until the leanest one is safe and let the rest run fat? That's the way that we do it. I think that that's probably the safest way to do it. That's not the way that will make the most power. Actually, when we run carbureted stuff, and it's pretty scary, when we run carbureted stuff the way that you would normally run it, like if you jet it according to the air fuel in the collector and the way that we normally do, if you jet a carburetor that way and then also have 802s, you'll find that when it's making good power, one or two of the cylinders is going to be really, really lean, and that's just not great. GMC Sierra LQ9 versus an LM7. That's not even a question. The 6-liter is better than the 5.3 in every way. Richard, what do you think of PCM hammer for tuning? I don't know what that is, so I can't really answer that. I literally live in the middle of nowhere. Richard, the LQ9 is a Gen 3. They had LQ9s that were also Gen 4s, right? I mean, I know that they had the LQ4 and LQ9 concurrently as Gen 3s, but it was the first to have Gen 4 rods. Okay. I'd like to see a Hemi intake shootout. I would too, with all the OEM intakes and some aftermarket ones. French Onion, Uncle Tony says Carb wins. I'm sure on every 318 it probably does. Jimmy, Richard, have you ever seen the VW, VR, or W engines? They have unequal runner lengths on both the intake and exhaust because of the cylinder heads. Usually those engines have wide, flat torque plateaus. Excuse me. You can adjust the runner length, and that's one of the arguments for the single plane, is that if you have four on a V8, if you have four runners making optimum power in one range and four making optimum power in the other, that you can broaden the curve. I haven't seen that, at least in the RPM ranges that we're running most of these motors. I haven't actually seen that come into play. Maybe that would be better, and I tried that with the adjustable fast manifold, because we had long, medium, and short, and we tried intermixing them to try to make essentially a single plane version of a EFI manifold, and it just didn't work very well. It just made less power than the long runners did at every spot. But the OEM guys are really good at that, and I don't know if they did it for packaging where they had to put that motor, because that plays a big part, or if they did, they never do it for maximum power, because that's never one of their criteria. If they do that when they're in the race program, and a lot of times not even then, because they're trying to do, you need to have maximum power with this restricted orifice, and it needs to get this kind of mileage, especially if you're talking about a place like Le Mans. So they have a bunch of things that they have to meet there, and it's never make as much power as you want, and it's never that. Where's Richard? I can hear him, but I don't see him. I thought that I was on here. I should be there. You should be able to see me off to the side. I was hiding it with the chat, but I shouldn't be hiding me. You guys should still be able to see me. You're so tiny now. That's why nobody wants to look at me. That's why I figured people would be much more interested in looking at the dyno curves and stuff than they would be at looking at a talking head, because, I mean, let's face it, the camera does love me, but James, Christopher Barron PCM hammer can be used to tune, but it's not as flexible as HP tuners. The PCM hammer can change OS without needing credits, and you can turn off stuff like VATs and codes for free. I'm not at all familiar with tuning factory ECUs, because I don't ever do it. The only thing I do is Fast or Megasquirt or Holly HP right now. Dan, that's a good point. Equalizing the air-fuel ratio isn't worth much power within reason, but the brake specific will improve. At least that's what I've tested. And we saw that I wasn't really doing it to test brake specific. What I was trying to do is I wanted to see if we had one that was 14-1 and we made it 12-8 like we would want the rest of them to be if it's a naturally aspirated one. How much power is that worth? One's got to be too lean. It's got to be not making as much power at 14-1 as it would be at 12-8. But the reality is when I got all 8 runners making the air fuel that I wanted all the way through the RPM range, in this case it was on a single plane intake manifold, so it took a little bit of finagling, it was worth very little power. The power changed very, very little. But like Dan said, if some of them are rich and you lean them out, you definitely can improve the brake specific fuel consumption number. John, evening. Richard, curious on fuel with the wife's 565 big block, 14.5-1, 282, 295, so 825, 801. That's like a real motor. Currently on 116, but with heat issues, contemplating E85 or M1. I would like to see you try E85 on that. 14.5-1 would be easy on E85, and we've run 1,000,000 pounds of boost on E85 stuff. So on a naturally aspirated motor, I think you have enough compression and stuff to really take advantage of that. Dan, in the right corner weighing 70 pixels is Richard. That's me. Actually, it's been, I've since COVID, I'm probably up to 75 pixels now. On the Summit LS information page, they show LQ9 as a Gen 4. I kind of thought it was, but I thought that they came out, that they were available at the same time. All LQ9s are 24X, Gen 3 stuff, but with bigger rods, P01 and P59. That's interesting, referring to the AFR and making power. Why do you think a few are lean when making the most power? I just think it's the best average that we're getting, and that's why we're seeing that power. And I think when, like I said, when we adjust one cylinder and bring it back into range, it didn't really seem to make that much of a difference. I think the big part of power is that we are getting fuel with that runner length and with that cam timing and with that head flow, and we're getting enough airflow into the cylinders, and we have some fuel in there and it's igniting and kind of making power, and it's not optimum in all cylinders, but it's close enough that we're getting the big picture of power production, and then we got to whittle away at the little things. That's why I just don't think it made that much difference. Does Plum volume factor into tuning runner length? No, the runner length is just the runner length. The runner length starts at wherever it enters effectively, or exits, depending on which direction you're going with a reflected wave, where the plenum stops and the runner begins. So it starts right there and then goes all the way into the combustion chamber, because the head port is actually part of the tuned runner length as well. Tim, always throwing shade at Uncle Tony. Uncle Tony has a 250 horse 225 slant 6 that runs 16s in the 8th. I'm not a drag racer, but I don't think that that's too impressive for an 8th mile time. LQ4 799 heads will be good. Dan, we've won a lot of races because we've been running at the end. Hey, you got to be there and you got to finish. To finish first you must finish. Braden, I have a Gen 453 with stage 2 BTR cam, putting a 1200 horsepower turbo on. Should I keep stock heads? Yeah, you can make 1200 with the stock heads. You just need ring gap, and you're doing that, and different rods and pistons. Yeah, you could max that out. Yeah, it's just going to take more boost because you have a stock cam in it. Mike, do you need a special carb for E85? Yes, you do. Usually just because you don't have enough fuel flow. Aaron, what about different like plug wires using stock ones on one side and let's say 36 on the other side? Is there an ohm variation or anything different that would alter any of the other factors? I don't think you could make the plug wire long enough to change the timing, and that's what you'd be concerned with. I also don't think you would limit because you have individual coils. I don't think you have to worry about the spark energy, especially if you're bringing the plug gap down. We've made lots of runs. I don't think ever with a 36-inch wire. But maybe 3 feet, that's not that much. On turbo applications, oftentimes we have to make plug wires that go out and around the exhaust manifolds and go underneath it so that we can get access to the plug down there. And we don't have to do that on all of them. So some of them are short like the factory deals, and some of them are like that, and we don't see any issue. Dan, on the Super Stalker Cleveland, the owner thought getting the distribution correct was going to bring lots of power, and lots was in caps. I even helped them fix the intake, and it wasn't worth 3 horsepower. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you look for things that you think are going to make a lot, and you want them to make a lot, and then a lot of times they don't. I found when I was doing all of the testing that I did, 450 or 500 pulls worth, on my Engine Masters Challenge deal way back, I found way more things that didn't work than I did find things that actually did work. I found a lot of things that worked up top, but not at the bottom. So, because we're looking for an average number, there was just it was just a trade-off. So the average number stayed the same or was within 1 or 2 of the average number that I was looking for, but it made more at the top and less at the bottom, or more at the bottom and less at the top, whatever the deal was. I found a lot of that stuff. It's hard to find stuff that makes better average power everywhere in the range that we were looking at. $16 in the 1/8. I don't, like I said, I'm not an expert, but I don't think that that's very fast. James. James, all 6-liter LS engines need and deserves in caps LS3 style rectangular port heads, period. So that means, that's the stamp on it. That means absolutely there's no more discussion to be had about that. I don't think that that's correct, but God bless you. That's awesome. Electricity travels at 186,000 miles per second. I thought that that's light. Braden, you're asking about the intake manifold. The Trailblazer SS is the best factory intake manifold for cathedral port heads. The newer one that they have is actually for rec port heads. The Ly6 and L76, and I think L98 has them too. But that's for a different motor. So the Trailblazer SS or the new body style, I think that they switched over to that same manifold. But it's not as good as a fast, but it's better than the truck manifold. Elfriend, what about coil packs? I've seen videos that advertise coil packs making not just top end power, but power through the whole curve. I've never seen coil packs do anything. I've seen coil packs that aren't working, where you have misfire, cause problems, and not make power. But we've tried various coil packs, and since we've made 1,550 horsepower or thereabouts with factory coil packs, you're fine with factory coil packs. Tim, I didn't think anything was slower than a non-turbo Swift. James, the L6 intake is a short runner LS3 style. Is it like the car intake manifold? I thought that all the trucks had the LY6 style intake. A human can run a quarter mile in 53 seconds. I know it's faster than that, because the world record for a 440 is less than 53. Have you ever messed with the Honda J-Series? I want to. My buddy Jimmy is putting a J-Series in his NSX. He swapped it in, just got it running. So yay, Jimmy, awesome stuff. And he's putting a turbo on it, and we're going to do a bunch of stuff with it. And I will be getting a J-Series of my own and putting it up on the engine dyno. That's down the road a little bit, but I do want to do that because they're very popular. They're good motors, and we've had a lot of them come in when I've been at West Tech, and Eric and Ish have tuned a bunch of them in sand rails and stuff, and they're a good, inexpensive, like performance kind of motor. Richard, were you at Baylands when the fire truck ran a 40-second quarter mile? I don't think I saw that, although that would be awesome. Radio frequency travels the speed of light. Electricity does too. What are your thoughts on Diablosport tuners or HP tuners? I've only used them very rarely on the engine dyno because when we've had to run some of the factory things like the Coyote that we did, and we also did the L83, the Gen 5. We had to use some sort of tuner for that too, but I don't remember what it was. And I wasn't involved in that. Eric did that for the L83 from West Tech, and then Ken Chrisley from Kenny Bell came over and did the stuff for the Coyote because I'm just not familiar with any of the factory stuff. Okay, the L76 is in the G8. Okay, so that's not a truck. There is. I thought that there was an L76 truck variant too. That's the one that I was familiar with. I didn't know that it was in the G8. Yeah, I thought, Tim, I thought so too. I thought that it was in the Denali's and Cadillacs. What happened to your old microphone? This is the same one, and what I did was turn the gain down for tonight compared to yesterday. What's a good choppy cam for a 98 precision 4? You have a 98 millimeter on a 408. I currently have a stage 4 BTR cam. It's a 115 LSA, and I want something a little more choppy. Well, just put a stage 4 like LS3 camshaft in it, an NA one, and that will work good. Does the J series have a single port exhaust? Some do and some don't. Depends on what. It depends on what year you're getting. What's the best LSA for a turbo cam? There isn't one. That's not a real thing. On the LS3, will a single plane intake and a 1-inch spacer make the same horsepower as an LS3 intake manifold? If you take a look at the LS3 intake video that I have up, a good single plane can make more peak power than the LS3 intake manifold does, but only past like 6,500 RPM. It doesn't make anywhere near the torque that the LS3 does, and it's down on power through most of the curve. But for peak power, yeah, it's pretty easy for a single plane to make that kind of power. What's the speed of light? What's the speed of dark? Nice. What are your thoughts on Speeduino ECU? I've never tried one of those. ProCharge Mopar. My son ran a 48.5 and went to state in 2013. The world record is 43.03. I thought that it was not too far over like 10 seconds per 110, because that's kind of the number for sprinters doing that distance. And actually it's pretty impressive that they maintain that pace so close to being that far distance. It's pretty awesome. Shannon, I have a 97 Vortec 350 cam headers in my truck now. Should I build this or go LS swap looking for a lot more horsepower? You can run boost on that one that you have. Although it's a 97, so I don't know about the fuel injection on that. Dan wants to know what engine will get you to the speed of light. Well, anything that Porsche makes, right? Because you're paying enough for it, right? Still a bit hot on the mic. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to see if I can adjust that. I can. How's that? Is that better? Hot mic. Hot mic. Desktop audio. Look at that. I'm going away and adjusting stuff on the fly. Okay, somebody let me know about the hot mic. Hot mic. Hot mic. Hot route. Hot route. Somebody tell me what movie that's from. My 77.9. I like the way that you threw in 77.9 because it's, you know, you couldn't just say 78. Vauxhall weighing 2,600 pounds did the same quarter mile. Nice. What are we doing for New Year's? We're going live. Perhaps win a prize. We probably should, huh? Maybe I should just do like an all-day thing, like ring in the whole New Year and just be live the whole day, right, for 24 hours. I should give away some stuff, though. I do have some stuff sitting around. I have some T-shirts sitting around. I got some cams. I got all kinds of stuff. Casey, can you go up a cam size when going between a 350 and a 383? Yeah, at least one, actually. Like a 268 cam and a 350 is going to be a lot smaller on a 383. What are the LS manifold horsepower differences? Is it worth it? Lucky for you, somebody, did the testing and has all that data up on his channel. You can look at the video that I did on all of the intake manifolds and see which one you like. The Grand Tyler. Boar, have you heard of Kelford cams? Yes, I have. Just installed one in an LS2. They are made here in New Zealand. The Kelford stuff I thought was fairly, I don't know about the LS stuff, but the other things that they are doing for other, I think that they do stuff for Barra engines and for other things, and I thought that they were kind of pricey, but I've never bought one, so I'm not sure, so let me know if that's the case. David, are you aware that the CT525 is now hand-built, has Molle forged pistons, pack springs, ARP rod bolts, and racing bearing clearances? Quite an improvement for a crate engine. I did not know that. Mike. I mean, Tim. So Uncle Tony built a slant 6 powered car that is only 3 times faster than a person. So if we did a relay race, we might actually be able to catch that car. I'm going to do a cold start video on my Tunnel Ram 468 tomorrow. It's buried in snow. That would be good, and you should be able to melt all the snow around it, or at least just blow it off to the side. It's quieter now, but the gain is still peaking out. It shouldn't be. I have that way down. I think guys are just whining about stuff. Let's see. Can I filter it? Let's see. Let's see what this does. I'm trying to find new stuff. I'm not sure what this does. I got nothing there. All I can do is turn it up and down, I think. Yeah, that's it. And we're back. But where did my... There we go. Let's see. This message is held for review. Turn the mic up a little bit. Is the mic too low now? That's what I like. I like guys that want to... Everybody should be saying, Richard, you need to crank it up to 11. At least 11. And only 11 if there's not a 12. There we go. Come on. More mic volume. Okay, turn the mic up. Kent West, what Honda engines have you gotten into? I wrote a book on K series. I wrote a book on B series. I wrote a book on D series. I've done a few things on H series only when I was over with Oscar Jackson because he was doing blowers on the Preludes and stuff. I haven't done that much on those. I did a few things on the NSX motor. Mostly Jimmy and Nathan did that from HP. They put a turbo on it. What else did we do? What other Honda motors? A lot of the earlier Civics and stuff I did stuff on. Lots of D-Series stuff as well. So what is everybody doing? $10,000 on the whole car. Let's see. Yeah, it's still too quiet, but still within the level 11 peaks. Let's see. KD, I just built my twin turbo 54 Cadillac for $6,500. Nice. So what's everybody doing for New Year's? We got some. Lisa, my lovely wife, Lisa just got back from the Costco, and we scored some lobster. So because the boys, I went over to see a few years back. I went over to see my buddy Gary Sheehan, who's a really, really good driver. He's won the U.S. Touring Car Championship a couple of times now. And we went over to see him, and he made lobster because I went over to see him and spend time with his family for New Year's. And ever since then, now my sons are love lobster. they want lobster every New Year, so we went and got some, and we're going to do it for New Year's. It'll be awesome. Nice, I love me single cams. To me, the J is just a V6 D series, just a V6 D series. Nice. How about a Honda EB3? Nope, not familiar. You can scuba dive for lobsters in SoCal. Now we like the cold water stuff. I like the Maine stuff. But yeah, you can get that in Southern California. Yeah, James, it definitely is all over. We were actually going to go see family, and I think that somebody got struck with it, so that's part of the world we live in now. $1,100 people watching. I can't believe that. I can't see the numbers. KD, my buddy's trying to sell me his 496 for $2,000, but just started at 509, so I'm not sure. I got to tell you guys about something that happened to me today, and I just found out. But I was looking through. I was looking for something else. I was looking on Craigslist, and I came across a Pontiac 400. And it was sitting. It had heads on it. Didn't have an intake or anything on it, but it had a pan and stuff on it. And the guy only wanted $100. And I hemmed and hawed and thought, I'm going to call him and find out what's going on with it. And he said, yeah, I don't know anything about it. It's sitting outside. I asked him if it was sitting in the rain. He said, yeah. So I figured, okay, it's going to be full of water. But then I got to thinking, having a 400, even if I had to take it apart, which I'm going to have to do, like bore it and hone it and put pistons in it and stuff, it's still going to be really cool. So I called him this morning and said, look, do you have a cherry picker so that you can lift this thing into my truck? I want to come get it. He goes, nope, it's already sold. So that's my lesson, is if you see something that you think is a good deal, then make sure that you go get it, because I didn't do that. And now this Pontiac 400, which is a very cool, like, other guy's kind of motor, and I've never done a Pontiac, has, like, slipped away. So yeah, 120. That sounds more like it. Yeah, 1100 would be a new high for me. Yeah, $100 for even if only the crank was good, or the heads were good, or the block was good, whatever. That's still a good buy. So, I have a good machine shop and stuff. We could have made that work, and I got Andy, who does a lot of Pontiac stuff, and he would know what to do. And it's not rocket science. It's just connect the crankshaft and the connecting rods and the pistons, and put rings in it, and port the heads, and put valves in them, and put a camshaft in it. That's not magic. Should I buy the 8.1 liter that I found in the 2001 2500? Yes. My thing is, I have 6 extra engines now. I know how you feel. I need to get rid of a couple of mine. Yeah, James, that's the problem, is you go into an area where there's lots of people. That's 454 roller. Richard, what turbo would you recommend for a Ford 300 inline 6-cylinder, late 80s EFI? I want 400 horsepower at the flywheel, stock cast iron heads. I'll use a Holley HP and multi-port injection. I think if you redid the head, you could port it. That intake manifold will work good. There are EFI conversions for it. Holley has one that works. And then I think if you add boost to it, I don't think that's going to be hard at all. Put any kind of camshaft in it and springs in it, and I think you're going to get that number without any problem. Guillermo, if I put a roots blower on a 383, how much should I get the rings? You should go to 30 or 32. And what fuel pump would I need? You're going to need a good pump, something that will support the fuel flow. Now, you're not going to be blowing through it, so it's not going to be as bad. You're only going to have to supply like 7 pounds of fuel pressure, 7 or 8 pounds of fuel pressure. Brent, thank you. Just had to make sure I'm going to get it in my 93 old body style. Should I get the Allison with it? As long as, if you do that, are you going to have to get the harness and everything to make the Allison work? Tim, just think if he ever spent any time on the dyno, how much he would know, and he would already know that it works when he went to the drag strip. Radsky, bought my Pontiac 400 and a 375 turbo hydromatic for $400 from a rusted out 72 Catalina. Nice. I'm still amazed there's not thousands listening on Fridays. Fridays are actually a very low number day for me. The Monday, Tuesday stuff is better. $454 roller for the 300. You could put a GT3582 or GT3076 on that for 400 horsepower. Probably a 3076. I don't know exactly what ARs they have available for that, but you're going to need a pretty good size one. If they have a 1.0 or a 1.1 or a 1.15 or something, I would look at that. Guillermo, 383 with a blower on it, as long as it's tuned properly, would be good for, you know, occasional street driving. Oh, cool. Tim, that's good information. So dynos don't work. You have to read the plugs after you clean them with a blowtorch and never bring a timing light or any jets to the strip. So do you just hope that it goes better by cleaning it or something? Okay, guys, come on. 2 more minutes. East Coast followers, nice. East Coast, you're live at 10. Better than watching the news. Yes, that's true. The news is just, they should call it bad news, because that's all it ever is. John Richard, stock Lightning 351 Windsor, short block with AFR 205s. NA, what cam would you suggest? You're probably, if you're going to put any kind of camshaft in there, you're definitely going to need clearance the piston, because the 205 probably has a big valve in it. It depends on how much power you make, and I don't know what intake you want, but I would start with the 274 and maybe think about something bigger than that, like that XFI 236 cam. Happy New Year! But I'll probably be here tomorrow too. I shall hit the sub button. It's my first time here. Guillermo, thanks for coming. Welcome. Enjoy. Maryland's in the house. Indiana. ProCharge Mopar wants to see a Magnum Big Bang. I just want to see the Magnum run again. KD, you want to see a 78-75 with a 9.6 AR on that 300? That's a lot of turbo. Florida, Indiana, Illinois, everybody's in the house. Texas is here, nice. So now we need to see Australia and any 2.2 liter news. I won't know. I mean, I've only talked to the machine shop about it, but that's it. And I did talk to David Vizard again, and he's not been feeling good, so I want him to feel better. I told him, just send me the head back. You don't need to do this. I said, your health is way more important than doing this thing. But he wants to do it, so he's going to keep going. One of the tests I am going to do the next time is I'm going to run one of those prototype cams that I did that I have left over. I'm going to run that on a 5.7 version of a 5.3. We've got a 5.3 that's punched out to 5.7. And I'm also going to compare the truck manifold to the LS4 intake manifold, because lots of guys have been wanting me to test the LS4 because there's this weird myth about it being terrible or not working or all those things. So I want to see what it does. I want to see if it actually works and how it compares to the truck manifold, and then if it does well, if it does better, if it does worse than the truck, we're like, oh, okay, well, we know where it is. It's more like an LS1 manifold. But if it does better than the truck, then we could maybe compare it to some other stuff. But it will help the LS4 guys know that, hey, look, if you have that on your motor, it actually does fairly well, or it doesn't. Whatever the information is, I'm going to provide it because it's a test I've wanted to do for a long time. I think that the turbo blanket probably would help repeatable performance. I think it would keep, it probably would keep heat in for a longer period of time. So I think that sort of thing might be better to see on the street, but it would be interesting to try on the engine dyno. Debunk the block splitting 5 liter. I think that would be good too. I think an H or a Big Bang 5 liter would be good. Okay, guys, thank you. I got to get going. Thank you guys all for showing up. If I don't see you tomorrow, have a Happy New Year. If I do, I'll be back. You guys will get to yell at me, and we'll get to cheer in the new year and maybe give away some stuff. Hopefully that will happen. Thank you guys all for showing up. And if I don't see you, thank you guys all for supporting the channel. It's been awesome, and the new year will be even better. Thanks, guys.